Good morning. We hope you've been enjoying the conference so far. We thank you for being with us today and for your interest in this session, where we will explore the social emotional skills that elevate your leadership, your presence, and your impact. I'm Jane Firth, founding partner of Firth Leadership Partners.
And I'm Andrea Zintz of Strategic Leadership Resources. The ideas that we'll be sharing with you today come from our book, Grit, Grace, and Gravitas, the 3 keys for transforming leadership, presence, and impact. The skills and qualities of grace encompass the social emotional skills so needed right now and are explained in great depth in our book, along with critical models, methodology, and research. Part of our mission in writing our book was to help us all better understand our capacity to evolve and have the tools to do so. We have 3 objectives for our time together today. They are to dispel myths and confusion surrounding executive presence and find the keys that help us develop a more compelling and impactful presence. Secondly, to see how we can be more effective and even masterful in dealing with the emotional realities and challenges of leadership that can drain our energy and get in the way of solutions, innovation, and progress. And thirdly, to see how the constructive power of grace can help us excel as leaders, how it can increase the value of our grit and our gravitas, and how it provides the keys to bringing out the best in ourselves and those we lead.
We found in our work with leaders that integrating the social emotional skills of grace simultaneously increases the value of a leader's grit, which is about his or her persistence and perseverance, and his or her gravitas, which is about having a depth of knowledge and experience. Today, we're going to share some of the tools and stories from our book that illustrate what grace has to do with elevating one's leadership, one's presence, and the impact that flows from it. So let's begin with what brings us all together today. Given the pandemic-related social and political disruptions we've all experienced over the last 18 months, as leaders, coaches, and experts in your field, you've probably been asking yourselves the same questions we've been asking ourselves. How can we help? How can we contribute that helps us rebuild, innovate, and lead the way forward? How can we generate stability when it has been disrupted? How can we find common ground to respect our differences and stand together? What skills would allow us to generate the insight and clear-headed thinking we need to move forward successfully? The disruptions and instabilities of the last 18 months have really led us to a crossroads, a time when the social emotional skills of grace can help us progress in critically important ways. These skills can lift us out of the negative pull of our reactions, to reassess, reconnect, and successfully rebuild from here. In her Wall Street Journal article, Catherine Dill wrote that leaders are going to need to become social emotional experts and that they will be prized for being so. Well, how do we get there? How can we increase our social emotional skills? The 2 pillars of grace provide us with the keys to this. The skills and qualities that form the 2 pillars of grace, reaction management and relationship intelligence, serve as a guide for how leaders can successfully increase their social emotional capabilities. So let's look at why grace is such an important organizing principle.
Now, we found over the last 4 decades of work with clients that while every leader is unique, exemplary leaders have significant differences in how they relate to the men and women they lead. This will become much clearer as we go along exemplary leaders have a very firm grasp on the constructive power of grace. Their grit and their gravitas are infused with the social emotional skills of grace. So let's start with definitions of grit and gravitas and consider some of the imbalances that occur when grace is missing from them. Grit is essential. It's an uncompromising commitment to performance excellence and strategic focus. For example, grit is critical for overcoming obstacles, for facing the need to have difficult conversations, and for persistence needed in getting to a desired finish line. But grit can become imbalanced. For example, when a leader's grit is out of balance, they can be oblivious to the needs of others or act in overbearing and inconsiderate ways. This can have a negative impact on the emotional operating state of individuals, triggering some upsets and lowering the morale of individuals and teams. We have an example to share from you. And first, we'd like to take a look at gravitas. Gravitas stems from a leader's knowledge and experience that contributes to excellence in performance. For example, a critical aspect of a leader's gravitas is due to the time and energy they've invested to acquire the knowledge and skills they have to date, the risks that they've taken, the commitment and discipline to excel and ask a lot of themselves. But gravitas can also become imbalanced in a leader, coming across as arrogance or negative competitiveness that disempowers others or takes liberties with or credit for others' ideas. A leader's unexamined imbalances will also have a negative impact on the emotional operating states of individuals and the morale and alignment of individuals and teams. Now, grace is rooted in constructive power, and exemplary leaders use their power constructively. Constructive power is always within our reach, and when we reach for it, our impact changes for the better, enhancing our approaches, our behaviors, the quality of how we connect with people, and our demeanor, our overall attitude and way of being. Grace helps us deal with difficult people and situations with compassion, energy, and inspiration. For instance, they relate to others constructively in considerate, empathetic, and genuinely caring ways. Because their grit and their gravitas are infused with the constructive power of grace, their impact generates a sense of meaning and connection, where people feel valued, respected, and appreciated. Exemplary leaders use skills that are found in those two pillars of grace. They manage their reactions, and they've invested in increasing the skills of reaction management. And they exemplify the skills and qualities of relationship intelligence. Look through a non-judgmental lens to see the kind of impact you're having. For instance, is your impact warm and welcoming? Is it engaging and inclusive of others around you? What is the impact of how you listen?
On the door to Oprah Winfrey's office is a sign that reads, "Be responsible for the energy you bring into this room." She came to this from a conversation with Dr. Jill Bolt-Taylor. It's important for each of us to know that our presence carries energy, which in its simplest form is either positive or negative, and it impacts whoever is in the room. Let's look at an example of a leader we'll call Mary, when the negative impact she'd had on her team was brought to her attention. Mary was an executive in a large financial services firm who led people in her division through an extremely difficult period, after which her boss called her into his office and said, "Mary, people are complaining about your leadership." Mary responded incredulously, "What do you want? results or happy people. And her boss looked at her and said, Mary, the best leaders achieve both. Let's consider that Mary had the grit and the gravitas to get through this difficult period. However, her team wound up feeling disempowered, drained, and depleted. An exemplary leader, calling on the skills and qualities of grace, would have had a more constructive, positive impact. He or she would have had the social, emotional skillfulness to recognize the importance of his or her team's resilience, melding the persistence that comes with grit and the knowledge that comes from gravitas with the constructive power of grace. With grace, a leader will have the knowledge of how to inspire, energize, and empower the men and women they lead to pull together in meaningful ways to find their way through challenging times. They'll provide context and meaning that lets people feel we're in this together. They might say something like, I know we're facing tough challenges right now, but as a team, I have the utmost confidence in us and our ability to solve the problems we're up against. Mary was able to lift herself out of her immediate reaction, became an observer of all that had taken place, and using a constructive lens, she found herself drawn to increasing the qualities and skills that would allow her to be a better leader in the long run. She recognized that she could be a far greater asset to the men and women she led and to her organization by infusing her grit and gravitas with the skills and qualities of grace. The changes in Mary's leadership that took place were profoundly appreciated by her team. She became a source of inspiration and someone they truly admired. You know, each of us have role models who we admire, people in our lives who have influenced the way we lead. Who have you admired? Who have you been inspired by? Take a moment to think of one or two people you've admired. And if you would, post in the chat one or two things that stood out in this person's leadership. You can use the questions on the slide to help guide your thinking. Maybe there was something you liked about their approaches to situations. Is there something that stood out to you in their behaviors? How about how they connected with you or with others? What could you notice about their overall attitude and demeanor that stood out for you? We'll take 2 minutes now so you can reflect. Please share what comes to mind in the chat. We will keep a watch over the time and bring us back together. okay. Thank you for your reflections. If you haven't had a chance yet, please enter your thoughts into the chat. We will have a little time to exchange some of your thoughts and ideas at the end of our video presentation.
So, as we said earlier, a leader becomes a far greater asset to the men and women they lead and to their organization when their grit and their gravitas are infused with the skills and qualities of grace. Let's look further at some examples of how grace changes the impact of a leader's presence. As we've said, grit without grace can be abrasive. An imbalance of too much grit can come across as domineering. Now, when a leader's brusque impatience or intolerance has people walking on eggshells, or there can also be an imbalance of too little grit that has a leader avoiding holding people to account or avoiding having important conversations. Gravitas without grace can come across as arrogance. The imbalance of too much gravitas comes across as condescending. There can also be an imbalance, if not enough gravitas. The imbalance of too little gravitas can have a leader come across as hesitant and indecisive, which can leave people without clear guidance and direction. With this in mind, let's look a little further at what grace provides for this. Grace provides the keys to social emotional qualities and skills that increase the value of a leader's grit and their gravitas, and that are critical for generating cultural conditions and social contracts that eliminate negative organizational dynamics. For an example, when the constructive power of grace is infused into a leader's grit and gravitas, he or she can create the conditions that translate into psychological safety. Now, psychological safety invites honest dialogue, it helps people feel genuinely valued. And psychological safety doesn't just happen. Exemplary leaders set out to create it, while other leaders may create the opposite because they lack the awareness and skillfulness to do so. So let's now take a look at our youngest exemplary leader, Amber, and how she approached the team that she would be leading in her new role as vice president. Now, when she was hired for her new role, Amber spoke with her human resources partner to gain an in-depth understanding of each of her direct reports, which gave her insight on how each team member could be developed. She learned that her new team had gone through significant problems with their former leader. Her HR partner helped her understand what had taken place and why there had been so many difficulties. She began to see how she might neutralize the negativity that had developed over the prior years. Amber felt it was important to keep in mind that she came from outside the system, that it was important not just to barge in. She made time to speak with each team member, talk about their expectations and hesitations, and understand they were looking for what they were looking for in a leader. And they had concerns such as, would she be able to understand the work that they did? How would she deal with the fact that they didn't feel like a team? They were on the lookout to see what she would do. Would she listen first or just change things? How would she represent them to the higher levels of leadership within the organization? Was she a leader who would value each of them? Could they trust her? Amber paid very close attention to what her team members had to say. She asked them what they needed from her. And knowing that they had been through a great deal and had felt out of the loop, she let them know that they could count on her to be transparent with them and would go to bat for them with upper management. Amber hoped her promises would ensure a sense that she was someone that they could trust and count on to have their best interests at heart. She sincerely pledged her advocacy and support. Now, one last important thing to consider, and that's that Amber also took the risk of being vulnerable with her team. She took the risk to let them know that she needed to learn from them, and she would do the best she could, but she might make some mistakes. She asked for their patience with her. She felt that by showing her vulnerability, it would help her team to feel safe in sharing their feelings with her. And she let them know that she would value their perspectives and would consider them in the process of the decisions she would have to make. So, what impact did Amber have on her new team? Well, she demonstrated that she valued each member of her team and that she cared about their needs, their concerns, and their aspirations. Her promise to have their back created a sense of inclusion, of psychological safety. And she created a social contract for the foundation of trust. Grace changes how a leader leads. Grace directly influences how challenges are faced and dealt with, how obstacles are overcome, how people think and work together to innovate and solve problems and align themselves to achieve what matters. So let's look further into the first pillar of grace, reaction management.
Here's the brain science we all need to know. When the amygdala is triggered, our higher order thinking, which is located in the prefrontal cortex, shuts down. And one of two states that can occur are commonly called fight or flight. An important part of managing our reactions is recognizing that we need a little time and self-compassion to reflect about what happened that triggered our reaction. By managing our reactions, we are able to become an observer of the process and, using a non-judgmental lens, come to understand what happened in ways that help us learn and grow from that very experience that was so uncomfortable. Elevating ourselves out of the reaction itself helps us choose how we want to respond. Managing our reactions is the equivalent of moving from one room in our brain to another. When we leave the room where the amygdala causes us to fight or run away, and we regain the benefits of our higher order thinking, we can call on our constructive power to guide us forward. Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and psychologist, found through his experiences that we have the power to allow ourselves time to process our reactions and choose our response. So let's look at an example of one of our clients, a leader we call Kyle. Kyle is a sales executive, relatively new to his role. Early on, a situation took place that gave him the opportunity to put the reaction management skills he'd been learning into practice. Here's what happened. For the upcoming quarterly executive meeting, Kyle's new team prepared the market information and sales projections he needed. What they put together provided Kyle with projections that were too optimistic about the remainder of the year and the year to follow. They didn't want to admit that they were struggling with certain sales and profits results. It didn't occur to Kyle to double check the report he'd received, and he made the mistake of taking the team's work at face value. As a result, in the executive meeting, Kyle found himself in an uncomfortable, compromised position. From the point of view of the CEO and his peers, he looked as though he wasn't on top of the market trends and lacked control over his team. This was embarrassing for Kyle. He kept his composure outwardly, but inwardly, his mind was racing. He shrank back, waiting for this meeting to end. He wanted to get to his office as quickly as possible and process what had happened in private. How did Kyle manage his reactions going forward? He got to his office and asked his administrator to hold his calls for 30 minutes. Closing his door, his first step was to recognize the tension he was feeling. He noticed that his hands were shaking, and he took some slow breaths to calm himself. Kyle was able to identify that he had felt exposed and embarrassed. Reflecting on what occurred took him from being solely inside the reaction to being able to be an observer of the reaction. He took out paper and a pen, and he wrote the word embarrassed at the top of the page, and under which he listed his concerns and thoughts that came to his mind about the situation and about his team. Here is a key observation Kyle was able to make. He noticed his responsibility for having taken the information from his team at face value. He realized he could have taken a different approach with his team prior to the meeting. Reflecting helped him clarify steps he could take to strengthen his relationship with his new team and restore his reputation with his peers and his boss. Here are a few of the actions he took. First, he met with his boss, took responsibility, and asked him for advice about approaches he could take with his team and his peers. Secondly, he pulled his staff together to discuss the experience he had had in the executive meeting. Kyle let them know that straight talk and honesty was essential, that whatever the facts revealed, together they would find the solutions and strategies they needed. Third, Kyle and his staff established their rules of engagement. The team worked through a plan that Kyle approved, and they clearly understood what they could count on him for and what would be expected of them. While it may seem that it would take a long time to go through these steps, the residual damage of this, if this kind of situation is allowed to validity, it can negatively impact morale and performance. Think of a recent time your emotions were triggered at work. For instance, someone criticized you in front of everyone in a meeting, or perhaps you felt upset because you were passed over for something you thought you deserved. Rather than struggle in the moment, grace gives you compassionate permission to take time to gather your thoughts. Grace helps you understand the emotions you feel, regain your composure, and find the clarity you need to more effectively deal with what happened. Research has shown that emotional intelligence is more important than IQ for success. Every emotion has a message in it that helps us understand our triggers and our reactions. Learning to use the intelligence in our emotions helps us restore our presence of mind and choose how best to respond.
Now, let's look at the second pillar of grace, relationship intelligence. To begin, let's consider some research regarding relationships and results. We found a study by the Management Research Group that was very illuminating. Their research was conducted with over 60,000 leaders in the US, Canada, Australia, and the UK. They were looking for how many leaders were excellent in both building relationships and producing results. To us, these are inseparable. They go hand in hand. Their study revealed a gap in the percentage of leaders who ranked in the top third for strength in both relationships and results. The result of the study in that top third was 0.77%. And their study revealed that the percentage of leaders who ranked in the top half for strength in both was 5.6%. Now, these low percentages reveal a critical gap between leaders who are good at both results and relationships, as well as leaders who are not. How do we close that gap? What skills and qualities do leaders need in order to have increased capabilities and strength in both relationships and results? And to become a social emotional expert, Returning to our earlier example of Mary, Mary was good at producing results, but the imbalances in her grit and her gravitas took a toll on those she led. Her courage to take the opportunity to increase relationship intelligence skills made a positive and lasting difference in her life, as well as the lives of those under her leadership. Now, we have seen repeatedly through our work with clients that any leader who is good at producing results and who wants to improve their reaction management and relationship skills can do so. So as leaders, relationship intelligence helps us understand how to keep morale high, how to help people find their footing with unexpected situations and challenges, and how to help team members who are facing demands that are increasing the pressure that they're under to recover. So now let's look at an example of a client we'll call Craig, who is an executive in a government role. Everyone Craig worked with thought Craig was brilliant and valued his knowledge and experience. The problem was he wanted to be the leader with the best ideas and solutions, thinking that this would add value and be of service to others, but his team felt closed out. Craig did some work to increase his relationship intelligence by looking at some of his own limitations and patterns. With the help of a leadership assessment, Craig reflected on imbalances he now recognized in his grit and his gravitas. For instance, he saw that he lacked some important skills for listening and creating the conditions for dialogue and collaboration, and he realized how this was getting in his way. As Craig became more self-aware, an imbalance he recognized was the imbalance of thinking one's opinion is the only one that matters, going on and seeming pedantic, speaking only on send and not listening to receive. He became more aware of how he defaulted to dominating the room by doing all the talking, citing evidence to defend his points, and insisting that his advice would be the best way to solve problems. So in considering the feedback, he decided to develop his skills to ask questions, listen to understand, and learn how to create conditions that would invite dialogue and collaboration. Among the aspirations Craig had identified for himself was a sincere desire to become a better leader with his team. He practiced skills to increase his constructive power and create a more engaging way of relating with his stakeholders. He let his team know that he was working on these skills so they knew what to look for in him. Craig focused on asking engaging questions of his team and peers, listening more carefully to what they thought and proposed, and considering their challenges and their ideas. His team members immediately began to experience Craig's efforts to improve. They really appreciated and benefited from the engaging collaboration that was now present in their meetings. As Craig learned from his journey, reaction management and relationship intelligence skills are essential social skills that help leaders evolve to excel at both results and leadership.
Okay, so let's talk about presence. Some of the myths about presence and a way to understand the impact of yours or another's presence. To begin with, we want you to consider that each of you has a very distinct and unique presence, as unique as your fingerprints. And the impact of your presence is felt hundreds of times a day by those you live, lead, and work with. So let's look at some of the common myths about it. First is the myth that you're born with it or not. Well, executive presence is not about having something in your personality that you are born with. Your uniqueness, however, is something you're born with, and your unique way of being with people is something within your power to develop and hone, author, and evolve. This includes the quality of how you listen to others, the interest you take in their success, the ways in which you lend your support, communicate, inspire, and bring out the best in those you lead. No one is born with these skills. They are learned. Anyone with a sincere desire can purposely take ownership of the impact they currently have and evolve from there. Pay attention to that. The idea that you are born with it or not excludes the idea that you could grow or evolve. And as perplexed as any one of us can be about executive presence, we all underestimate our potential to grow and evolve, no matter how accomplished we already are. The second myth I want to cover is that if you're an introvert, you can't have executive presence. What does the idea of being an introvert mean to you? Many believe without question that if they see themselves as an introvert, they are at a disadvantage in terms of being able to develop a strong executive presence. In fact, people who see themselves as introverts can be the most extraordinary leaders with a calming and reassuring presence. Susan Cain saw herself as an introvert. Her book entitled Quiet points out ways that people can go beyond this label. How? Presence can become fueled by your passion to lead and make a difference. In Susan's case, she began to see herself reach beyond her introversion and adeptly defend one of her clients in a negotiation. She was present in ways she had never been before. This surprising outcome led to her research and the writing of her book. Introverts can have extraordinary leadership capabilities and presence. Their capacity to reflect deeply and develop evidence and logical approaches to ideas and contributions becomes even more valuable through their leadership. You're probably familiar with the next myth as well, that presence is all about charisma. A dictionary definition of charisma is compelling attractiveness or charm that can inspire devotion in others. Another is a divinely conferred power or talent. While many icons can be seen as charismatic, there are also many who made a significant difference through their leadership, but would not be considered charismatic. Beyond his meager circumstances, Abraham Lincoln had a humble yet driven force to educate himself, communicate, connect, and help people understand what he saw to be very important perspectives. His values were embedded in his character, which provided a sense of purpose for his leadership and his impact. He had many challenges to overcome, such as occasional depression, resistance to what people saw as his shabby look. His legacy was the result of how his grit, grace, and gravitas came together. Again, his grit was the result of his persistence, and his gravitas took root through the knowledge and experience he forged over the years. He infused them with his grace, using the language of inspiration and reason. His leadership and his presence transformed our nation. We hope that considering these myths as myths rather than as truisms provides you with some freedom for the evolution of your presence. Now we're going to take a look further into what presence is composed of.
So, what is presence really? Our work and research led us to understand that presence is seen and felt in these 4 ways. A stands for the impact of a leader's approaches. B stands for a leader's behaviors. C stands for the quality of how he or she connects with people. And D stands for his or her demeanor. Now, your presence is something that is seen and felt each time you enter a room, have a conversation, lead or participate in a meeting, and guide people towards a specific direction. Your presence comes through the approaches you take, your behaviors, the quality of how you connect with others, and through your demeanor. The constructive power of grace integrated into a leader's presence transforms how he or she impacts others. While everyone's presence has an impact, exemplary leaders convey their impact through the 4 elements of A, B, C, and D. There's no mystery here. You don't have to be an extrovert, and it's not about something you're born with. The skills and qualities needed to transform leadership, to develop your presence are very readily available. Now, there are specific skills leaders can learn that help them bring out the best in themselves and others. It takes discipline, commitment, and determination to get there, but there are great rewards in terms of performance, productivity, and outcomes. Using the skills and qualities of grace, if you find there is an imbalance, you can use your constructive power to address the imbalance and evolve even in the midst of resolving situations and problems. We can't change what we haven't owned and taken some responsibility for. But by approaching our flaws constructively, we can use them to grow.
The accomplishment of what matters most in work and life depends on our combined intelligence, commitment, determination, and coordinated efforts. High performance in the final analysis, whether we're looking at an individual's or a group's performance, is really a function of people working well together. Arianna Huffington wrote in her book, The Fourth Instinct, that François Gillot once told her there were doors in time. She noted that we are facing such a door in time, an opening for great possibilities of a new being, for a breakthrough in our evolution. For the first time, something as vast and epic as the destiny of mankind depends on something as personal and intimate as the way each one of us chooses to live, think, and behave. What becomes possible when you lead, live, think, and behave through your constructive power? What becomes possible in your evolution as a leader? What can transform as a result of your grit and gravitas, having the constructive power of grace flowing through them? We hope you found some of the answers you were looking for in our time together today. And we hope by reading our book, you'll find even more. We look forward to talking with you soon in the Q&A.
Please remember to complete the evaluation at the end of this breakout session.